everyone, welcome once again to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Eric.
And today we are doing a special discussion about nostalgia. Eric wanted to, this was Eric's idea, and he wanted to do a discussion about watching the phenomenon of watching stuff that you saw when you were a kid and finally fast forwarding watching it again when you were an adult, and the experience of it either holding up or more often not holding up and the effect that has on you. So we're going to explore that topic a little bit. Eric, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so what really made me just kind of come to this was I was flipping around on Hulu and I came across two shows that they have on Hulu. And I was like, oh man, they've got these shows. The first one was Monster Rancher, which I used to watch when I was a kid. And the second one was Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I used to watch when I was a little bit older, but still when I was a kid. Monster Rancher I haven't seen since I was like 8 or 9. Yu-Gi-Oh! Probably 14-ish. And with one of them, that being Yu-Gi-Oh!, I have a pretty good memory of what it is. I know it's not good, but I still kind of want to go back and watch it. With Monster Rancher, I started watching, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of what I remember, and I stopped. And so it got me thinking about nostalgia, and I think I've kind of worked out 3 tiers of nostalgia. I think the first tier of nostalgia is the thing that you genuinely haven't seen since you were younger. And I think those ones are completely 50-50. Like it really could or could not hold up, and I think most of the times it doesn't hold up, which maybe makes the times that it does hold up that much better. I think the second tier of nostalgia is the thing that you knew really well but haven't watched in a long time.
Yeah, I know just what you're talking about. Yeah,
because like I've got Monster Rancher, which I watched when I was a kid, but I don't really remember that much of it. But then there's other stuff that I watched when I was a kid that I remember a lot, like Dexter's Lab, which I didn't rewatch for probably about 10 years. Like once it went off air, I didn't rewatch it until it showed up on Netflix. But I remembered that a lot more vividly than I did, something like Monster Rancher or like even something like Our Real Monsters from Nickelodeon. And then I think the third tier of nostalgia is the things that you kind of never stopped watching, but you still consider nostalgic. And those are usually, I think, the things that you make excuses for, whether they're actually bad or not.
well, and I think part of the reason that's the toughest one, because part of the reason you make excuses for it is because you've gone back to it so much that you can't distance yourself from
And
it.
I have that with things that are generally regarded as good. I can't, I cannot critically look at the first 3 Star Wars films. I can't genuinely tell you what's good and bad in those. It's one of the things where, like, people are like, oh well, Return of the Jedi, everything falls apart. I kind of can't see it because they're so embedded in me, and I never really stopped watching them. I like those are things that just I kept with me, and so they kind of like transcend critical analysis. And I think there's lots of stuff like that people like, whether it's good. I think a lot of people have it with Batman '89. Like regardless.
And I am definitely one of those. And I mean, like um, when I finally let myself look at that more critically, I still didn't look at it critically enough. And I mean, like I've talked about this a lot, but I mean, like the first time, when I did a rewind on it, I gave it a 3.5, and I mean, like I still wasn't critical enough of it. Every time I watch that now, after listening to Eric, to people like you and King talk about what's wrong with it, I finally can look at it a little bit more critically. But boy, I sure don't want to. Like I can see what you're talking about, but there's still like this part of me that's like, yeah, it transcends all that. It's not about that, you know. It's about what it made me feel like when I was growing up with it, and the way it defined me. So yeah, I have exactly that with a lot of movies. I don't know how to look at The Matrix critically.
Oh, I have no idea how to look at the Matrix critically either.
So hard. I mean, like, I can kind of generically point to things like, yeah, okay, everybody's an archetype, but I don't care. I should, but I don't.
There's certain things you can point to, like, yeah, that's kind of funny, but like not in a way that detracts from the movie.
Sure.
But like with '89 is something that I saw when I was a kid, and then I didn't see it for a long period of time because I didn't own '89. I'd seen it. I distinctly remember renting it from the video store and watching it like 3 times. Um, but I don't think I really watched it again after that until I was in my teens. I probably didn't see it again. There was probably about 10 years between seeing it when I was maybe like 7 or 8 to, well, it wouldn't have been 10 years, but I didn't see it again until at least after it begins. So I had a completely different experience with that film than like you did. Um, and I think when you have that gap, it's a lot easier to come back to it critically.
Yeah, and the problem is sometimes it really hurts your feelings, right? Like you'll come back to it and you can't help but look at it critically because it's been so long since you've seen it. Sometimes it's almost like looking at a different movie because you're looking at it with different eyes. You know, you're such a different person now than you were when you last saw it that you look at it now and like you had the movie you remembered, and then you have this thing because the movie didn't change, but you did. I had that recently with, of all things, The Brave Little Toaster.
I haven't seen that since I was really little.
Do yourself a really big favor if you have any fond memories of it and stay far, far away.
Really?
Because, or at least this was the experience I had with it, Eric, the movie doesn't work at all. It meanders all over the place. It can't decide what it's about. It's not enough of a musical to have songs in it, and the songs are, like, drag on and are like really just strange, and none of them sound enough alike to feel like they should be in the same movie. They're all very, very different styles, and I mean, like, it is just a really, really bizarre film. And the one thing, rewatching that, and understand, like I don't mean to be too critical of it. It hurt my feelings because it was a big deal for me when I was a kid, and the one thing that really did hold up for me watching that movie was it freaked me out when I was a kid, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it was still pretty creepy now. That is a creepy movie.
I
Really is. Like the the air vent that, like, I mean, like, they're all appliances, but you see a character, and by the way, I forgot that was a Disney film. That actually is a movie made by
Is
Disney.
it really? That's an official
Yeah,
Disney movie?
yeah.
Where's my Brave
And
Little Toaster level in Kingdom Hearts?
um, I don't know. I'm assuming they don't have the rights to it anymore because I don't think the TV movies were, or direct to video or whatever those sequels were made by
Oh,
Disney.
okay.
So I'm not real sure what happened there, but yeah, Disney's logo is on the cover of the DVD, and the you have the air vent that has like a Jack Nicholson sound-alike voice, which is super creepy. And there's a lot of that in that movie where there's just like voice actors doing voices, except John Lovitz, who's just doing John Lovitz. And he's the one great thing about that movie is the radio. He's fantastic. Everything else really doesn't work. And the vacuum cleaner's cord keeps changing sizes. Anyway, but like that vent, you see a character in a Disney movie die in the first 15 minutes of that movie, and you're like, holy crap, this is hardcore. I mean, yeah, he comes back to life at the end, but good God, that it is terrifying when you're a kid.
I had the reverse of that where I had a movie that I hadn't seen since I was younger and I went back to it and
And it was better.
yeah, well it was a thing where like I could see the flaws, but even still I still like the it's Hook. I don't know if you ever saw Hook.
Hook was on my list of movies I saw too many times when I was a kid.
Really? I see.
Yeah, I couldn't go back to that movie because it's, and this was a video Sarah and I made about the phenomenon of movies you saw so many times when you were a kid that you don't want to see them again.
I had that
Um,
with episodes of television shows.
yeah, I
Where
had
like
that
when I
with,
went back to shows that I hadn't seen in years, I would still skip episodes that I'd seen like 7 times in reruns.
or that episode that was always on if
Whenever,
you
yeah,
flipped the channel and saw it, like
yeah.
that was the episode that you always flipped to. Um, so with Hook. That's one that I still feel like I kind of have memorized, but I probably haven't seen it in 15 years.
I think Hook is a brilliant film. It has this weird amnesia problem because everybody forgets everybody's existence at least once in the film. And there's a Tinkerbell scene that needs to be removed completely because it doesn't do anything, and it's immediately forgotten. But like as a whole, I don't know why it's like that was a film that I was kind of tentative to go back to because it's kind of like the butt of a lot of jokes, and people kind of like make fun of it, and like, it's one of Spielberg's flops. And no, I went back to it. I'm like, no, this film's brilliant. I think this is just a fantastic film. I think that whole experience is interesting, and like, do you ever go back to things you haven't seen in a while and you like, and you wonder if you're only liking it because of? I constantly question things that I saw as like I constantly question like Toy Story. I'm like, is Toy Story really a good movie, or did I just see it when I was a kid and really liked it? Can I accept flaws in Toy Story? Are there flaws in Toy Story?
Yeah, well, that's one of those rare gems where I just can't find very many.
Yeah, but I'm always
You know?
suspicious that it's because of like childhood connection. I mean, that movie was huge when I was a kid.
Yeah, well, what helps for me with that movie is I have done a full blown analysis with my stepdad, who was not a kid when that movie came out,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and he and I together couldn't find very much wrong with it. And also, like, and I mean, I don't want to just straight up trust numbers on Rotten Tomatoes or anything, because critics aren't always necessarily right about things. But I mean, like, that is one of those 99 or 100 percenters. Like, everybody thinks that's a brilliant film.
Rotten Tomatoes is the best weapon for when you want to show why a movie is good or bad, and the thing that you just ignore when you don't agree with it. You're
Yeah,
like, no, see, it's got
and
it's got
that's
a
why I hesitate.
13%. It's terrible.
That's why I
Meanwhile,
hesitate to say that, because there are plenty of movies that I like that like didn't
oh,
get
The Spirit's like an
very.
8%.
Yeah, but I enjoy it.
I know, me
It
too.
it's stupid, but I like it.
Um, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the entire and the other thing that I've experienced is going not back is the wrong word. Experiencing things that are nostalgic for other people. Like the big one for me that everyone saw as a kid that I didn't was The Goonies,
Yeah.
and I saw that when I was older and I didn't like it, and I was like, I think this film continues to survive based purely on nostalgia. I don't think anyone that goes back to this movie looks at it critically.
Well, and let's take this opportunity to look at a couple of other phenomenons that are kind of offshoots of nostalgia. With Hook, for instance, I have kind of an anti-nostalgia with that movie. Like, I don't think I could ever like go back and watch that and really enjoy or like it that much because of how it makes me feel now, having seen it too much when I was a kid, and just emotions connected to it because of stuff going on that I remember going on when I was watching it.
Right.
So I mean, like, that's a negative subjective thing. And then the other thing is how other people's nostalgia affects your appreciation of something. And you were, because you mentioned the Goonies, and I've had that with a lot of other things too, where people grew up with it and loved it and said, "Oh my God, you have to watch this," and you finally sit down and watch it, and you cannot understand people's obsession with it.
Well, one of the biggest problems I think with our society is we're so satirically and parody driven. If you didn't see it as a kid, there's a lot of stuff that like by the time you get to it, like it's not as impressive because
You feel like you've seen it. It's
yeah,
homage.
yeah.
It's been homaged a million
Star
times.
Wars
Yeah.
has that problem.
Well, and Star Wars is one of the number one things that has that problem. Because everything parodies
Planet of
Star
the Apes
Wars.
too, the original Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a great example, because who doesn't know the big twist ending of that
Can I
movie,
tell you a story?
even if they've never seen it.
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah,
So I bought Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes, which has that awful cover that tells the ending.
right.
Didn't let my wife see it. She's never seen the film. I got to watch somebody experience the ending of that film without knowing it. She didn't know it. And when she got to the end, she felt dumb because she was like, "Oh, I've seen these other things that reference this," but she hadn't put like two and two together.
Yeah.
So I got to see somebody like blindly experience the ending, and that was fun. Um, it's the only time I think I'll ever get to see that until I have kids. Uh,
I I get really excited when I go back and watch something that I heard a lot about and never got around to and finally watch and then realize that somehow or rather it didn't get spoiled for me. Like I didn't get Fight Club didn't get spoiled for me. And I don't know how I managed to go 10 years after that movie came out and never got that spoiled. Um that was a thing.
yeah, yeah, no, no, there's a couple of movies like that where they have you know what's impossible? Uh, Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, yeah, impossible. Everything makes fun of that.
Yeah, I it and the thing is, I mean, as a kid, I don't remember that having an impact because I was so young when I saw those movies. Like by the time it would have had an impact, I'd already seen them dozens of
Yeah,
times.
me too.
I kind of want to
And
wait when I have kids till they're old enough to be coherent enough to really understand that.
yeah, but you'd have to give them sensory deprivation for them not to already know about it by the time you showed it to
I'm okay
them.
with that.
Um, the thing with Star Wars for me too was like until I was a certain age, they all ran together.
Yeah, well, you know what's weird?
Like I didn't know, and I was like this with other things too. Like the Back to the Future trilogy, I couldn't remember sometimes which scene happened in what movie when I was
Oh, I
little,
saw this
and
all out of order. I saw three first.
it was like, and I think I did too, and it was like that with Star Wars. Also, where like I thought bits of Empire happened in Jedi and vice versa, and so like the whole Luke I'm your father thing. There was no progression for me watching those movies. It was all these scenes all jumbled up together.
Well, do you have misremembered things when you go back to things? You're like, I remember this scene and it doesn't exist because
Oh yeah, I sure do.
I distinctly remember as a child seeing Yoda having a green lightsaber in the original trilogy. Doesn't happen.
Yeah. One for me, I was a little bit older by this point, but I mean I was still a kid, 10 or 11. I remember distinctly in the theater Star Trek First Contact, Worf after um today after he says something like oh no, I know what it is. In that movie he says perhaps today is a good day to die, and it sounds like when you go back and rewatch that movie, this toward the beginning when he's still in the Defiant before he goes to the Enterprise. He says perhaps today is a good day to die, which sounds like a follow up to some other line, right? And I remember seeing that movie in the theater and his saying before that all happened, today is not a good day to die, and it's not in the movie, but I swear to God, it used to be.
Well, what I think I told
It's
you,
not a deleted scene. Nothing.
I think I told you when last we talked that my mom was recently talking about what seems to be a mass hallucination of
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You told me
yeah,
about this.
yeah, where there's a bunch of people that all remember the same scene from Wizard of Oz that does not exist, where Dorothy pulls the blankets, where they say, "Oh, it was just a dream." Dorothy pulls the blankets off, and she's wearing the ruby slippers after she's gone back home, and she says, "See, it wasn't a dream." And my mom remembers the scene. I guess she like looked for it and looked for it, and then looked it up online and found that there was tons of people that all have this memory, and it doesn't exist. Um,
Which is fascinating because that kind of would have been a really really neat ending.
yeah, yeah. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think nostalgia is so interesting because I, I mean, certainly there's things that we go back to that kind of going into it we know are going to be bad, and we still kind of are okay with it. Like I think sometimes there's like a weird line where like when you go back to things, sometimes they're bad and that makes them bad, but sometimes they're bad and that makes it more enjoyable because now it's funny. Um, like Power
Yeah, and
Rangers
for
has that.
Yeah, and for me, it kind of has at least a little bit to do, if not a lot to do, with just how it made me feel when I was a kid watching it. And so it's really hard to separate those things out. And I try not to be like too obnoxiously nostalgic about things to where like I insist things are good that I know critically aren't great great stories. Power Rangers we've talked about a million times now, but like that's a show that I know. I think we said this last time we talked about Power Rangers. I know if I were the age I am now, seeing that for the first time, I wouldn't watch it.
No, no, absolutely not.
There's no way. But and I also think though that that's a show, and I have this with other things. I have this with the original Ninja Turtles cartoon. That if I hadn't watched it in years and years and years, and I finally watched it now, I would be really disappointed with it. But luckily, every couple of years, I'd out of curiosity go back to it.
Yeah, well, that same thing for me with Power Rangers is at least once a year I sit down and watch at least some chunks of a Power Rangers season. I mean, now it's really easy with Netflix to just sit down and be like, I'm going to watch some of this. So like like that's something that's never been kind of far from me.
Yeah, that one threw me for a loop the first time I went back to it at just how unsubstantial the stories are. And I didn't remember them that way. When I was a kid, I remember being really invested, and then I went back and watched more as like it's like a teenager. Like it was like I stopped watching that show around 11 or 12, and then I finally went back to it by like 15 or 16. And I mean like. When you're 29, 4 years is nothing, but when you're a teenager, 4 years is a really big gap.
Yeah.
And so I finally watched, and I don't even remember. We might have been just on TV or something. I think it was when. No, it wasn't when Dino Thunder came on. It was before that because I was older at that point. But anyway, I guess I watched it on TV or something, and I was like, "Holy crap! This is not what I remember." But like then. I guess I was able to adjust a bit after that.
Well, I have a question because I know people that
Yeah,
say that even as kids, they noticed like, the footage shifts and things like that. When you were a kid watching, because it wasn't just Power Rangers, obviously, it was Beetleborgs and VR Troopers, which I never saw until just the other week. And wow, man, we need to do commentaries on those.
are they pretty funny?
They're hysterical. We
Is that on Netflix?
Yes, we need to do. All right, here's what we need to do. We need to do the first two because it's a two-parter opener and then a two-parter season finale for VR Troopers. They're hysterical. We need to do them.
I'm game. Yeah, I'll definitely watch up on that.
But VR Troopers. I really really liked Masked Rider when I was a kid. Um, it was a very different experience than like Power Rangers because it was like the show that nobody else watched and it was
Yeah.
on at like 6 in the morning. But like
Oh, I had that with Beetleborgs. Nobody I knew watched that, but I did.
but like looking at all of those shows, did you ever notice the drop in quality when it cut to like action scenes, or just not even drop, but the different film stock quality?
I did, but I was like 9 or 10 when I started watching those. I wasn't like five or
Yeah, I
six.
don't know. Like I have no memory of, or if I did notice they changed, I guess I assumed it was a stylistic choice.
I certainly noticed it a lot more
Oh,
later.
it's you cannot not see it in Power in the first season.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
so different.
You
Um,
know, you were talking earlier about stuff that sticks with you that you remember that you think you remember everything about, and then you finally watch it again. Like animated, the first Ninja Turtles cartoon was a thing that one I didn't go back to for the longest time. And I mean, like I think maybe I saw an episode here or there, but just really gone back and looked at hard until a few years ago. And that was a show that like I remembered all the characters. Like I could talk about it intelligently. And then finally, you go back and watch it, and like we took that thing so seriously when we were kids.
oh yeah, there's a couple of things that I go back to where I'm like, man, as a kid, I thought this was a serious action show, and it's
Yeah,
so
me too.
silly.
And then there's the stuff going the other way that is exactly the same, like Batman the Animated
Well,
Series.
Batman the
It's
Animated
just
Series is exactly the same, and
it's exactly the same. It doesn't change.
well, the thing
Uh,
with Batman the Animated Series, and there's a couple of other things like it. I feel like because there was a gap in me watching it. Um,
but yeah, there was for me
but
too.
now that I've seen it so many times, I've lost that nostalgia connection. I don't see it like that first time when you go back to an episode that you saw as a kid, you have all those memories. And like now it's to a point where like I've seen these episodes so many times, I don't really have that anymore. Like I could still remember that, but it's not the same.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a contemporary show for you at this point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of a
That's
bummer.
interesting.
That's what was so much fun about us doing uh the uh the Power Rangers episodes is that I hadn't seen those since I was a kid. Um,
Yeah, it was kind of fun to revisit that and see how it. I mean, I had seen them again, but to see your reactions to things.
but well, and there's do you have things where you get like God, this is something that I don't know whether it's real or not. Um, I remember when I was a kid catching like the end or part of an episode of Ninja Turtles, um, where they go to fight Shredder and Shredder's just like beating them, and Casey Jones is there and he gets knocked to the side and he breaks Donnie's staff in half, and like remembering thinking that that was like a huge thing, and I only got to see that snippet. I don't know why. Um, and like there's so many episodes of the animated series I've never been able to figure out if that's a real thing or if that's like something that like I dreamed.
I don't know. I haven't seen that episode since I was a kid. I'd have to go back and revisit it. I mean, I think Casey Jones is only in a handful
Yeah, should probably just look at the Casey episode, see if there's even an episode with Casey and Shredder in it.
because I know there's an episode that introduces him that has his name in it in the title.
I've seen that one. It's really funny. Um, because the guy voicing him is just doing Clint Eastwood.
That's great.
Um, but yeah, no, I think there's a lot of stuff like that where like I don't know, like I just I have so many memories of things that or in the case of Star Wars, I convinced myself that the scene was a memory until I actually went back and rewatched it and realized it does exist. When they look up at Luke as he flies away in Empire and they say no, there's another. For some reason, I'd convinced myself that scene didn't exist. But I'm fascinated by just people talk about like, well, you're watching it with nostalgia goggles, and I don't know, like a lot of times, like, okay, so I love Transformers the movie. I think Transformers the movie is the single greatest animated film ever made. And then I was watching it with a friend who had never seen it, and he was like, "This is completely unintelligible. Like, you cannot tell what's going on." And it was just like I'd never thought about it that way before. I was like, "Oh, I guess like as a film, maybe it doesn't really hold up." But at the same time, I jumped in, head first with that when I was a kid. Like I didn't have any trouble following it. I think you're just more willing to go with things as a kid.
Yeah, because that means that's not the reason you were watching it.
Yeah.
You were latching on to other stuff, and that's the whole. That's been for me the entire experience with Spawn Year.
Well, and I it's like, when you were a kid, um, I'm sure you had the same experience I did. Everybody seems to. I'm sure you read comics out of order, or just you had random stray issues.
Yeah, and to be fair, because I have that background and I did that a lot, I can still do that now.
I see. I try to at least start off with like an arc.
Well, if it's an older thing, I definitely can. Like I have a lot of random stray issues of things and of older things, and I'm happy to just go read them and see where things were. But I will do it with modern things sometimes too. I'll jump into something right in the middle, just to see where things are. I mean, I don't buy a lot of things that way.
But like when I was a kid, like I would have like, Batman 500, Batman 497, and Batman 506, and I would just read them.
You just read them, yeah.
Yeah, it's same thing with TV shows. Yeah, it doesn't matter what episode's on, I'm watching it. Um,
Yeah, the difference is a lot of that stuff wasn't serialized, right?
I watched a
Like,
lot of serialized stuff when I was a kid, or at least I feel like I did. I mean,
and when we were kids, there were still. I mean, we were getting into a day and age where most comic storytelling, when we were getting back into comic books, was serialized. But then there still were plenty of things that were single issue stories. We don't have as much of that now. But like even still, the stuff that was serialized, I would jump on to whatever. But with TV shows, when I was 10, 12, uh, almost everything was one and done stuff. You could watch almost any show. just whatever was on.
Well, I mean, I guess it's probably because I'm a little bit younger than you, but like, I didn't have that. Like I was kind of there for the boom of anime, which is all serialized. So like, a lot of stuff I watched when I was a kid, like Digimon and Ronin Warriors and Gundam Wing and Dragon Ball Z and all that, like those are all really
See, I
continuous
was already a
stories.
teenager by the time that was a thing.
Yeah, see, whereas that was, I was 9,
Yeah.
and so I was really into serialized stories, which is actually really funny because I remember when I was a kid, I'd be really bummed if I missed an episode of Dragon Ball Z. I own most of Dragon Ball Z. You can skip like 5 episodes at a time, nothing happens. Um, that's a show I will make excuses for. I can go back. It has horrendous pacing problems. Like literally the single worst paced show ever made. Um, you didn't notice it when you were watching it day by day because it ran Monday through Friday. Kind of like, I guess, Green with Evil. Where, like, probably if you're watching it daily, you didn't notice that nothing happened. Um, but yeah, like they're
Yeah, because you had all that time in between, and that you know what, that's a really good point. This is almost a different topic, but the difference in how shows are made, um, based on how they're going to air versus how it's done now. Because when people make shows now, they have to keep in mind that people are probably going to binge watch, so they can't rely on those kinds of gimmicks anymore.
yeah, well, and that's something that like I've found with like when I get a show that like I watched as a kid and I'm really excited to watch it, and then I watch a bunch of the episodes and I realize the episodes are kind of all the same. And
Yeah.
Darkwing Duck. I have the first season of Darkwing Duck. It's such a different experience watching Darkwing Duck back to back to back to back than it was, watching it every Saturday.
That's a show I've not gone back to.
It mostly holds up. I
I haven't gone back to
I
that.
would
I haven't gone back
recommend
to.
not binge watching it. Um,
I haven't gone back to Freakazoid.
I haven't gone back to Freakazoid either. I've heard Freakazoid holds up, but Paul Dini was involved with Freakazoid, and like I think I get the impression that Freakazoid was a show that was a little bit ahead of its time. Like I get the impression it holds up because it was like internet YouTube meme comedy before that existed.
Yeah.
So like maybe that was a little bit ahead of the curve, but like I hadn't rewatched The Tick until a couple of years ago, or maybe even just a year ago. I got season one, whereas I know you kind of kept up with that.
Yeah, because that's one of my favorite things ever, and that will always hold up. But that's not just a nostalgic thing.
No, no, not at all.
That thing is just
I,
brilliant.
I, I
Like,
remembered so little about the Tick that it was probably, as close to going in cold as I could. I guess, all right, there are two shows I really want to talk about
yeah, okay.
because, I don't know, nostalgia plays a lot. The X-Men animated series and the Spider-Man animated series.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All
Yes,
right,
of course.
the X-Men show, I can't critically look at. I'm sure it's got problems. I know it's got animation problems, but like I hear a lot of people like, "Oh, that show doesn't hold up." I can't see it. It was so big when I was a kid, and I mean, there was even a gap in between me watching it, kind of. Not as big a gap as some other things, because it was more frequently aired because of the movies. But I think that show totally holds up.
See, that one I watched when it was on, and but I didn't watch a ton of it. I just saw episodes here and there, and that's a show that you really don't want to watch out of
Well,
order.
and they aired it out of order,
And they,
so
yeah, it's that's what, that's a good point too. But yeah, I watched random select episodes here and there, and then I did go back to it after a good long time when I was an adult, and this is years ago now, but I was probably 20, 21 when I went back to it, and so that one I did have kind of an adjustment I had to make, but as soon as I went, okay, so this has a lot of silly early '90s kind of
yes,
slang
there's
stuff.
yep,
Once I kind of adjusted my mind for that, I was able to still get wrapped up in the stories.
yeah, yeah. Well, I,
It's sort of like reading '70s comics or something.
I kind of to go off on a mini rant.
Yeah.
Um, I hate it when people say things are dated. Um, because
What about when they are?
things don't date. Special effects date. Things don't date. Like okay, for example, the Terminator does not date. the special effects in Terminator dates. It doesn't date because it takes place in 1982. The movie was made in 1982. They're all dressed ridiculously. That's how they dressed in the 1980s. Same thing with 70s films and all of that. So I don't know, like going back to like the X-Men series, it takes place in the early 90s and it makes bad early 90s jokes. Like I don't know, like it's something where like I kind of I don't know. I don't think things really date in the way that people say they date because they're set when they exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it is a problem when things are either set in the far future,
Oh,
but
absolutely. That's
still super
different.
dated. Or but the thing is with X-Men, it's a little clunky because it's not really set specifically in the 90s.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just
And so I think
misunderstood
that's the
that.
reason people do call it that. Now, to be fair though, it was made for that audience and it was supposed to be present day. And that was present day for that period. But that is one of those things where they could have maybe put a little bit more effort into making it not making it a little more timeless. Not having so many references to things
Like
that
Batman the Animated Series did.
because yeah, exactly. That show holds up because it feels like a hodgepodge of different time periods. You put it all together, and you're in this kind of funky present day. But and I mean, like, this is neither here nor there. But just to argue with you slightly, I do think that there are things that can date like that. And I'll give you an example from Batman the Animated Series. Um, the second Riddler episode
Is awful.
and is really dated
Yeah.
because of the way it deals with computers and the internet and virtual
Well,
reality.
see, things like I think science fiction
That's
can date like that. I guess Terminator, in fact, would to go back to my own example, dates because of the timeline. But like I hate it when people like say like, well, Terminator looks so dated. I'm like, no, it's set in '82. They look like they live in '82. But yeah,
yeah.
when
At,
you go
at
into
that
science fiction, all of that stuff dates horribly.
no, you're right. At that point, just watch it like it's a period
Like the
piece.
Breakfast Club isn't dated. Breakfast Club is about teenagers in the '80s.
And that's one of the reasons I don't feel like everything needs some kind of present day update where it's like, well, if we make right now in 2014 movies set in the 1970s, why can't you watch a movie made in 1982 and look at it like a movie that was made about the year
Yeah,
1982?
we don't need Ferris Bueller's Day Off in 2014.
And no, exactly.
Um,
But that's an entirely different
yeah.
topic.
So then we have the Spider-Man animated series, that's which I was watching on Netflix, and then they pulled it. Um,
Yeah. I don't know why they did that, by
I
the
don't know,
way.
they did it with X-Men too.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer because I was gonna go back and rewatch all of X-Men in order, which I haven't done. Um, but and you kept warning me not to watch it. And for the first, I want to say like 2 seasons,
What, Spider-Man?
yeah, you kept telling me like
Yeah.
it doesn't hold up, it doesn't hold up. And for the first 2 seasons, I was like, you're crazy. This is exactly the show I remember it being.
Well, and and I'm just for the record, I'm not suggesting that to anybody else necessarily. I will still occasionally go back and rewatch that, but it had been so long for Eric, I was really worried it was going to ruin it
Well,
for him.
what's funny is there is something that hurt that show, and that's when I found out that the rule about Spider-Man can't punch people, and that becomes really noticeable when you're looking for it.
There's a lot of things like that where once you see it, you can't unsee it, right?
Yeah. One of the things that did not bother me was they talked about like people talked about like stock footage in that show. With him swinging around the city, never bothered me. That's the same shot of him swinging around the city.
No, that didn't bother. What did bother me were the copious flashbacks.
Okay, that was something you kept talking about, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I got to season 3, and like half of every episode is flashbacks to the past 2 episodes.
It's so tedious. You're like, I just watched this.
When I was a kid, it
And it won't
wasn't.
just flash back for 10 seconds and remind you of something. No, it'll show you entire sequences.
Yeah, but like when I was a kid, I remember like, and maybe it's because, maybe like I watched out of order, so like it was nice to have a refresher or something like that. But yeah, like that show was huge in my childhood. I watched that
Mine
show,
too.
uh, and it's just I don't know, like that's a show that I kind of want to. There are a lot of things I like about it. I,
Yeah, me too.
I'm
I think that show was really experimental in that way, in that it was trying to translate comic book storytelling to animation.
Well, I think it
And I
was
think that,
doing more complex, ongoing stories than X-Men. Like you look at X-Men and like you have like Mr. Sinister kind of shows up, but it's not like an ongoing plot really. Like it's kind of like just kind of a subplot. I feel like Spider-Man was really like each season was an arc.
yeah, the seasons were themselves were like one big giant arc, but like X-Men would constantly call back to things that had happened earlier. Um, I mean, there still was a lot of that kind of ongoing storytelling, but I guess, yeah, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, you are right about that. But what I meant about like translating comic book storytelling was that the big thing Spider-Man did that X-Men didn't was constant narration,
Oh yeah.
because that was a Spider-Man thing. The comics always did that. You always had an internal monologue for Peter
Well,
Parker, so
and it
that
also helps that he wears a
felt.
mask, so you don't know when he's actually talking and just in his head.
Yeah, which is really nice. And the other thing is those flashbacks, because I think that it thought that it was doing the comic book thing of catching viewers up to speed in case they didn't watch yesterday. And once again, that's something that they thought they could get away with back then, because there were hours in between when you'd watch the shows.
Well, I would say maybe not thought they could get away with. I did get away with. Like I feel like it did
Oh, no,
work
no, they did.
when
You're
you
right.
watched it like that. I don't feel like I mean this is I have a lot of trouble with television shows. I'm gonna say pre X Files. Episodic television is not my thing. Unless it's a comedy. Like I can deal with a comedy, but like I have a lot of hard time going back to like the Incredible Hulk. Like that's something that's kind of before my generation, and I have some nostalgic memories of it because I did watch some episodes as a kid, but like I that's painful for me to try and rewatch. I'm just like, okay, so he's gonna go into town, he's gonna meet somebody, there's gonna be a problem, he's gonna turn the Hulk at the 28-minute mark, and then he's gonna more stuff's gonna happen, and then he's gonna turn the Hulk again at the 42-minute mark.
Let me ask you this: can you go back and deal with episodic courtroom dramas?
Um,
Like, can you watch like a Murder She Wrote or a Matlock or
I
a?
have never watched any of that. I will tell
Oh,
you,
really? So you've never seen Diagnosis Murder?
no.
That's one of my favorite shows from when I
I
was a kid.
keep wanting to go back and
Big fan
try.
of Diagnosis. Fantastic.
I keep wanting to go back and try. Oh, there's a show that Fraction keeps talking about, and how it's like a huge influence on on Hawkeye. I can't remember what it is now, but that's a show that I've kind of wanted to go back to. Those are a little bit easier, but I still kind of like overarching stories. It's kind of there's a point in my life where I think I realized that, and that's when I stopped watching Law and Order because I used to be a huge Law and Order SVU junkie.
Yeah.
Um, God, I wonder if that's a show. Like, I wonder if enough time has passed now that I could be nostalgic about that show. I wonder if I could go back and watch those episodes that I watched. Um, which makes me
See,
feel.
I grew up so hard with episodic television that wasn't necessarily overarching that like I can very easily go back and forth. And in fact, I kind of miss those kinds of shows
See,
and wish
and
we.
I feel like I'm being just a couple of years younger than you. I grew up with that with arc-based television, mostly from the influx of anime.
Yeah, but the thing is, there is, of course, even now, plenty more episodic stuff than Archie, because it's only been still, kind of recently that we started doing more stuff that way. So I mean, like, I grew up with a lot of reruns of a lot of older stuff. I watched lots of '60s and '70s TV,
Yeah,
and
whereas I didn't. Although I'm not. I don't have a problem with going back. Like it's never like special effects wise. Although I guess I should specify when I speak episodically, like Batman the Animated Series doesn't bother me because each episode is a different thing. It's more of the formulaic episodic television.
sure, yeah.
Um, but that's really just a whole nother thing. But I don't know. I feel like we've gone off on all these different directions. Um, really, I wanted to focus on critical thinking and nostalgia, but I think we just kind of jumped around that, and I don't know. Maybe there's nothing to be said about it.
Well, I mean, I think all the stuff we just talked about is related in that we're talking about
It's all very
you know,
personal experiences with that kind of
how
thing.
Yeah, and how we were shaped by that stuff, and like why we like the things we like now.
Oh, absolutely. I think I really think that slight gap between you and I has really like I think I probably have more of an inclination towards arc-based stories and just a general more darkness than you do. And I think that's entirely due to the influx of anime. And probably at the same age you were watching Power Rangers, I was starting to watch things like Gundam Wing, which are about slightly more complex, like political ideologies. And I think, like, in some way, that kind of affects who we became as people.
Well, and you were born in what year?
91.
91. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a huge age gap. You and I are what, like 7 or 8 years apart. But I
Yeah.
mean, I talk about this a lot. There is a huge difference between 1984 and 1991. In a way, there is not as big, and I mean entertainment wise. In a way, there is not as big of a difference if you look at 2014 and 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, no, I feel like unless something changes, I think maybe you and I and those around our age are kind of the last generation that will have a thing where even though we had similar childhoods, that couple of years really gave us different entertainment. It's close enough that we were able to both see the same things, but we also like there's things that you watch that were kind of way before my time, and there's things I watched that were a little bit after your time. I don't think kids nowadays really will have that. Um,
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, it would be kind of interesting to to look at. I mean, watching Jason grow up, it's going to be really interesting to see what his childhood is like versus what mine was.
Well, one thing that I think is really interesting, there's two franchises that will not die of children's television, and I'm really interested. Like, I don't know any really kids that are into those two things, but there's Ben 10 and there's Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is on like its fifth or sixth incarnation now. And Ben 10 is also on like its fifth or sixth incarnation now, I believe. And I'm kind of curious, do the kids that watch like Ben 10 now, do they go back to season 1 Ben 10?
I don't know, but you say two, like those are two that won't die, but they're not the only two. You got to wonder, the kids that are watching, current Ninja Turtles, are they aware of the previous series?
Yeah, even just going back to like the '03 series, like do they know that existed?
Yeah, and like these days, Power Rangers has like this really conscious awareness of its history that it didn't used to have.
I'm really
Well,
curious.
actually, that's not fair. There was that period where it didn't, but then before that, it did.
I'm really curious to know, is Power Rangers still a thing?
Well, yeah. What I want to know is, are the kids that age, okay, the age of kids that show is technically aimed at, are they watching that show, or is it us, like pathetic 22 to 29-year-olds that grew up with it, we just won't stop watching
No,
it?
no, it's got to be kids to some extent because I don't think they'd be making the show that they are now if they were aiming it more at us.
Well, I don't think so either. And for the record, I'm not currently watching because I just don't think that what they're making is very
Yeah,
good.
I'm
But
I'm 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 not either. But I was thinking about this.
but then like Dino Thunder was a little more sophisticated,
Oh, yeah, well, a
and
lot of those shows
it
were.
was more sophisticated, and yeah,
Yeah,
so
RPM, SPD. Um, I actually I would pretty much say almost every Power Ranger series pre Samurai was more sophisticated than Samurai. Um,
well, I guess I was saying more sophisticated than the original.
oh yeah, well, and I think most everything after the original was more sophisticated than the original on some level or
You get
another.
once you get past Turbo, yeah,
Well, but I think Zeo was more sophisticated than Mighty Morphin.
by a little bit,
Yeah. I mean, really, once you get in space, that's kind of when they really
not
started to
by
turn it
much.
into.
Zeo really feels like just an extension of Mighty Morphin. It's
But
not different.
but I was just thinking because there was just a day where my friends and I just binge watched a bunch of VR Troopers and Beetleborgs and that stuff that was on Netflix, and I was kind of struck with, okay, there's a number of Japanese shows still on television right now that are these kinds of shows, but we don't have them anymore. And which really just made me wonder, like, clearly Power Rangers was so popular they started doing that with other shows. Is it? It can't be the juggernaut it once was. Well, obviously, never to the extent that it was at the very beginning. But I wonder, is it even as popular as it was when like Turbo came out?
I doubt it. I wonder if it's cheap enough to make that they're making enough of their money back and selling enough
Well,
toys
and
that they're still making it. I mean, like I think it speaks to the fact that Disney didn't think it was worth keeping around.
well, that's because they bought Marvel. Disney's constantly searching for some kind of boys' toy, but I
Well, no, I know, but like, why would they drop Power Rangers just because they got Marvel if it was performing well enough for
yeah,
them?
well, and I wonder if part of it is also that yeah, I think the thing that started with our generation that everybody a little bit older than us can't understand, or at least not in the same because or maybe we don't understand is what I meant to say,
Yeah.
is there used to be what, 4 channels, so like everybody watched the Incredible Hulk whether they liked it or not. There was nothing else on. Everybody watched Knight Rider. Everybody watched like there's this like
Well, let's be fair. The period you're talking about, there were more than 4 channels, but there weren't as many as there are now.
yeah, yeah, that's
Talking early 80s, you've got 30, 40 channels by that point.
but wasn't most of that cable?
Well, yeah, but at that point, more people were getting
I mean,
cable.
even when I was a kid, cable was like, not everybody had cable.
We did.
Although now that I think of it, I still know people that don't have like I know a couple of people that are still on dial-up internet, and that blows my mind. Um,
Yeah, that actually kind of blows my mind too, kind of think of it.
but yeah, I think that like if we had as many show options as kids do now, would we have been drawn to Power Rangers?
That's a good point, although I don't know that of current, like what's actually being produced right now, that kids don't have actually less than they did when I was a kid.
Maybe. I
As
don't
far
know.
as television goes, I mean, like you go back to the early 90s, and I am still finding out about crazy shows I had no idea got made.
Yep, band
Um,
cars.
we don't have that now. I feel like there's a couple of channels that have kid shows, and then for the most part, all the rest of the entertainment is adult based
Well,
stuff.
one thing we really don't have that much anymore is that what's that called? Like regional shows where like there's shows that there was like the shows that were on Fox Kids, and then there were the shows that Fox ran for kids that were like at 6 a.m. and like
Yeah.
you might not have gotten the same things that I got. And so I think that's part of that is like, that there's that show that J Train told me about, which is Vam Cars, which is a show about kids who turn into vampire cars. Um,
Well, and you find out about all these bizarre properties that were like movies or some other weird property that like they made a cartoon show of. Like, did you know that Danger Diabolic got a Fox cartoon show for 2 seasons?
but didn't it like never air?
No, it's you can find them on YouTube. It aired.
But I thought it only aired like in France or something.
Oh, really?
There's I think it's that show, and there's another show that's it's like a western about like a cowgirl, and we made it and only aired it in France.
I don't know, man. Diabolic, like was in English.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's definitely shows like that.
And it had the Fox logo on it. That's what's weird. Like when I've looked at the reruns on YouTube, it sure looked like they taped it off American television.
Maybe so. If it was, I missed it.
Unless it got rerun, I guess it is theoretically possible. I'd have to look this up. That like it ran in France or somewhere, and then somehow or rather, some Fox affiliate got a hold of it and reran it here later, years later. I don't know. You got things like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. How does something like that turn into a cartoon show for kids?
I don't know. Or
Toxic Avenger? Was it
yeah,
Toxic Crusaders? Like that's bizarre. That like Trauma would put out
the the
would
the, the Rambo show, the RoboCop cartoon. There
yeah.
was a RoboCop cartoon that I watched as a kid that I really liked about RoboCop in the future. Actually, now that I think of it, I think there was a couple of shows like that. Like I watched Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century.
Do, do you remember, or like Phantom 2047 or whatever that was called?
Yeah, I never watched that, but like I always remember seeing the VHS.
Did you ever see the Beetlejuice cartoon?
Yeah, it was on Nick. Actually,
Yeah,
actually, to be fair, I
that was super popular.
I saw very little of it. I wasn't allowed to watch it when I was a kid.
Oh, weird.
I just looked it up. On January 1st, 2000, the animated series produced by Saban International premiered in Europe on Fox Kids and lasted for 36 episodes before ending in January 1st, 2001. So yeah,
Is that is
Diabolique.
that
Yep.
well, that's weird, man, because it sure doesn't look like a show made in 2000. It looks like a show made in 1995.
Weird.
Yeah, I watched part of it. And the reason I say that is because the animation looks like the Tick.
There's the Tick was a really popular animation style.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I mean, like Fantastic Four kind of looked like that.
Spawn looks like it.
You think?
The first season, particularly that
Huh?
first couple episodes, when he goes to Wanda's house and he's wearing a trench coat and he's in broad daylight, it totally looks like
Yeah,
the Tick.
yeah, that does. But a lot of the night stuff I always thought looked more like, I don't know, like creepy 1980, like late 80s, cartoon movies. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm not sure.
Well, and then of course there's that string of cartoons that were made by one production company that I never put together. We're all the same production company. Extreme Ghostbusters, the Godzilla animated series,
Oh yeah, remember
the Men
that?
in Black animated series, which I remember really liking and really want to get
Yeah.
on DVD or Netflix. I've rewatched a good chunk of the Godzilla animated series from Netflix, and it's pretty good.
You know, the Men in Black show, that's one that I've been a little bit worried about going back to because I remember loving it.
Well, the thing I remember most about it is that it's dirty and icky like that first movie, and that's the thing that the sequels got wrong, is they made everything too clean.
Well,
Um,
and it's dirty and icky like the comics. Like the comics in that show make that first movie look really polished.
yeah, well, and that's how all of their shows were. Like Extreme
Yep.
Ghostbusters is really dirty and icky. So is uh the Godzilla show. Like they had really creepy monster designs. And that's a show that I went back to, and I was impressed by how well it held up.
Well, are you talking about the show that was based on the '98 movie?
Yeah,
Wow, and it was good.
yes, it's good.
That's
Its
bizarre,
biggest problem is that he doesn't fight Godzilla monsters, but they didn't have the rights to them. Um, but other
oh,
than
okay,
that, it's a good show.
dude. I
Um,
gotta tell you, man. Every time I see that logo, I want to eat tacos
I know. I
because that movie and Taco Bell were like
I'm telling
synonymous.
you, we're coming up on maybe it'll even be this year because the new Godzilla movie's coming out. We are going to
Boy,
get.
I hope to hell that Taco Bell gets licensed
I think
for
we're
that.
coming up on the I don't know what you'd call it the cycle of selling nostalgia to people. I think
Oh
maybe
yeah,
this year we're gonna get some novelty. I'm gonna need a bigger box Taco Bell dog shirts.
you think? Yeah, I
I
don't
think
know.
we're right around the time for us to start selling that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you gotta wonder when nostalgia ever stops being in as a selling ploy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there seems
Because
to be
you
some
hear
kind.
people say that all the time. Oh man, nostalgia's in. I'm like, nostalgia has been in since the late '90s.
Well, it's what you're selling, right? Like the
Yeah,
nostalgia of the late '90s was GI Joe, Transformers, that kind of a thing. They were selling
yeah,
to the '80s crowd.
but dude, that stuff is still in.
Well, I
They're
think,
still selling that
but I
stuff.
think that stuff came around as nostalgia and picked up a new audience.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But that's the thing is that if we're just regurgitating like that all the time, then yeah, nostalgia's just gonna stay in.
I don't
And
no. Actually, I'm going to put forth a theory. I think nostalgia is going to go away.
do you
I
think?
think everything is so readily available on Netflix and DVD that I don't know if nostalgia is going to be that much of a thing. I think what created nostalgia is the distance from something. Whereas now I think people are always going to have things at their fingertips. I think we
Well,
may be the last generation that has nostalgia.
yeah, I can see that, but then the question you got to ask yourself is if that stuff stays available and people keep watching it and keep liking stuff that's older, or we're going to keep staying in this place where we keep regurgitating stuff and not creating new properties because partly because that stuff is still
I think
there.
if the last decade has taught us anything, it's that we very rarely let new properties come out. I
Well, so in that case, it just kind of seems like the nostalgia thing might kind of just perpetually stick around to a degree. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's where I kind of argue with you a little bit because, like, if we're just going to keep regurgitating like that, there's always going to be this longing for, new stuff, but also this longing for the original because we're sick of seeing the new thing that's not as good as it.
yeah, you might be right.
I mean, streaming and YouTube and stuff is not killing that, not yet.
Well, but I don't know if it's still nostalgia at that point or if it's just
Oh no,
liking
you're right.
things.
Yeah, yeah. At that point, I don't even know exactly what to call it, but it sure feels like regurgitation.
Like, like I feel like because of streaming and all that stuff, like because you will constantly have it at your fingertips, like they're gonna sell you it because it's the new hip updated version of what you liked, but I don't know if it will sell. Like I think they're gonna hit a point where it's gonna be harder to sell because, well, yeah, you're
I
selling
hope so.
me, I don't know what's something like yeah, you're selling me Beetleborgs, but I can go back and watch Beetleborgs. It's like that kind of it. Like I don't know. I think they're gonna hit a point where maybe nostalgia doesn't sell, and maybe they will have to perpetuate new media. Or
Because we're banking really hard, and I talk about this a lot on name and brand recognition. And I'm convinced that a lot of things get put out not because people remember it and have nostalgia for it, but because since they've heard of it, they feel like it's safe and the thing they should go see.
oh, absolutely, and they count on that. I mean, that's how they make movies. I mean, how many times have you gone to see a movie where you're like, well, they could have just called that something different. Well, they didn't call it something different because they knew you would go see it because it was called this.
Yeah, and that's the weird catch 22 is would you have even known about it if it was called something
I
else?
think about that every time I see a trailer for an action movie. Because most of the time it's just nothing. But like, Jack Ryan, I know the name Jack Ryan. I mean, I'm not a Clancy fan, but like I've seen Hunt for Red October, like I have some familiarity with it. So I think like immediately I'm mentally more open to a Jack Ryan movie than I would be if it was the exact same trailer, but it's Chris Pine's, you know, Max Explosion or something.
Yeah, they made up a new some new character.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe there's
you're right. Yeah, it's not just that it feels safer to the filmmakers and to the
it's safer to
distributors.
the
It
audience.
feels safer to you.
Yeah, and I don't even know if at that point that's nostalgia as much as familiarity. Like I have no nostalgia for Tom Clancy, but I know who Jack
Right.
Ryan is. Um, I think we're gonna see something interesting with RoboCop. Um, because that looks like it has no traces of the original film in it. Um, but it's also, I mean, I guess that's a concept where like you can't say, well, why didn't you just call it something different? I don't know.
I can certainly say, why didn't you just make another sequel?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the thing I don't understand with
God, that would be
RoboCop.
really cool. I would have so much less issues with that film or just that trailer if it was,
Set in the same universe.
yeah, God,
Yeah.
that fixes a lot of things. But yeah, you know what? RoboCop's a movie that I saw when I was a kid, way younger than I should have. Um, and like I went back and rewatched that. There was probably, let's see, I probably saw that when I was like 8 or 9. And I went back to that when I was probably like 16. And I remember coming out of the room after watching it and going to my mom being like, what were you thinking letting me watch that? Um, Although I guess that's another aspect of nostalgia that I've noticed. Do you notice old people or older people? Um, they don't remember what things are like. Like everything that they remember that's family friendly is not. Like I
Oh yeah.
Ghostbusters is not as family friendly as people think it is. They swear a lot. They all smoke.
A lot of it is the package it's wrapped up in. You know, RoboCop looks like a superhero movie, and therefore it must be okay for kids, even though it's rated R.
Well, I mean, probably what helped that along was all the cartoons and toys.
I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff. You know, I sometimes I talk about this accidentally as if it's new. You know, taking movies that are clearly, if too mature for little kids and merchandising them to little kids. This has been going on since the '80s or earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, but I think I don't know. I think that's just a really
I think
interesting.
I think Terminator 2 had that pretty hard.
At least Terminator didn't have a cartoon. But yeah,
Yeah,
Terminator 2 is
but
another really good
keep
example
in mind,
of
of course, that at that point, video games were primarily for the eight eight and older crowd.
right. But yeah, Terminator 2 is another really
Yeah,
good example of a movie that was an R-rated family movie. Um,
yeah, isn't that weird? And that one really isn't family friendly.
I would say that's more family friendly than RoboCop.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you there.
But like you go back and like you rewatch Ghostbusters, there's a lot of swearing and a lot of talk about sex, like in a way that you don't remember it until you go back and rewatch it. Um, and I've seen that look in my mom's eyes before, like with my siblings, where like they're watching something and like her eyes like go wide for a second when she's like, I don't remember this in the movie. Um, I actually more recently it happened with Catch Me If You Can. They were watching it and she forgot about his joke, which is the only f bomb in the movie. I'd forgotten about it too. But I think that's something interesting nostalgically that I don't like. Maybe it's because I'm such a pop culture guy. Like I'm constantly reconsuming things,
Yeah.
and my parents aren't, so they didn't see those movies for 10 years before I watched them, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're constantly refreshing yourself on
But the
things.
80s as a whole, I think, is a lot, specifically swearing wise, a lot more intense than people remember it as. I think a lot of movies that you think of as kind of family, or people think of as family movies, are like Priscilla was watching E.T. the other day, and the kids are sitting around the table smoking and swearing like sailors
Yeah.
at the beginning of that movie. I didn't remember that. I don't know. It's just that's a generational thing, I guess. But like that was perfectly acceptable. I don't know. I feel like we've gone in so many directions. We've kind of beaten this as much as we're gonna get out of it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, it's getting super late here. We should probably.
It's getting even super later here.
Yeah. So, anyway, thanks as always for listening, folks. And Eric, thanks for bringing up this topic. That was fun.
Yeah,
And we'll see you later on. I'm Captain
I'm
Logan.
Eric.